Hello and welcome to the first Sunday Politics of 2026. And January so far has been anything but quiet in the world of local politics. Fresh from revealing his multi-year budget proposal, the Finance Minister John O'Dowd joins me in the studio. John Burrows launched his bid for the Ulster Unionist leadership on Thursday. Shortly we'll ask him what he believes his candidacy offers the party. And here with her analysis of that and more, the Belfast Telegraph's political editor, Suzanne Breen. John O'Dowd will give more details about his budget plan to the Assembly tomorrow, but already many of his executive colleagues have poured cold water on his draft multi-year plan, which is now out to public consultation. The Finance Minister, I'm pleased to say, is with me now. Welcome to the programme. Happy New Year to you. You can tell me if you think it is a Happy New Year or not from your perspective. You released your plan earlier this week. You said the prize of a 3-year budget is that it will allow us to transform our public services moving forward. The problem is some of your fellow ministers aren't convinced they can even continue to deliver current commitments based on this plan.
Well, the plan is built around the spending review announced by the Chancellor on June 11th of this year. So what we're dealing with is a budget imposed on us by the British government, which in my view continues a trend of austerity which we've seen over this last 14 years or more. So I have to form a budget on available figures. I have presented my executive colleagues and the public and the wider community out there with those proposals. I'm in listening mode. If others have other proposals to bring forward, I am most definitely prepared to sit down in a constructive manner with my executive colleagues and discuss those through. But we are working within a budget envelope.
Yeah, well, you've said you're in listening mode, but you can't be very pleased with some of the responses you've had so far. Your political opponents haven't been short of things to say about your draft budget, and they're all pretty critical. The opposition says it's an unambitious ghost budget, bereft of vision. The DUP claims it's deeply flawed and requires significant changes. Alliance and the Ulster Unionists have detailed their serious concerns with your plan as well. Is it possible under those circumstances, in your view, to actually reach agreement and to deliver a multi-year budget?
Well, firstly, I don't know what ghost budget means. And in terms of describing the budget as deeply flawed, the figures in the budget stack up. The proposals in the budget are workable. However, as I've constantly said, we are now in a consultation mode. I thought it was right and proper after discussions with political colleagues that we had reached a point that we then needed to move out to the public. We're now out with the public. But in parallel with that, I'll discuss and engage with my executive colleagues. And if we keep our eye on the prize of a 3-year, multi-year budget, then I think we will achieve agreement on this, because the alternative is to further hamper the delivery of our public services, hamper our economy, hamper businesses in creating and sustaining jobs. So keep our eye on the goal.
Yeah.
Multi-year budget. Let's engage with each other in a positive manner, and I believe we'll achieve that objective.
The difficulty is that basically all of the departments are being asked to deliver more with less. Only 4 departments in 26-27 would see modest increases in their budgets for next year. That's education, health, justice and infrastructure. Now, the figures don't reflect any potential overspend by departments for this year, and we know that that is a real and present challenge. Obviously, you want ministers to manage within their current budgets where they can. But the question is, what if they don't? And we know there are real problems within health and education, for example. We saw that exchange of letters between you and the Education Minister before Christmas. I mean, we didn't imagine that. It happened. Paul Given says he's facing a huge hole in his budget.
As I said at the start of the interview, I'm dealing with, and my executive colleagues are dealing with, a budget envelope imposed upon us by the British government. We have to work within that envelope.
Right.
So that's the starting point. In terms, I accept all of my executive colleagues are facing very, very difficult positions. It's not the amount of funding I would like to introduce into a budget or I'd like to introduce into our economy or public services. But we have to deal with what's in front of us. We have a leadership responsibility to deal with that. So each minister is going to have to examine their budget, come forward to me with proposals. If they come forward to me with proposals for additional funding, then they're also, in my opinion, have to come forward with additional proposals and where that funding can come from. For instance, if we examine, for instance, the Education Minister's comment that he needs an extra £800 million next year, that's the entire budget for the Department for the Economy, which is responsible for the economy, it's responsible for our universities, it's responsible for tourism, it's responsible for skills. That's the scale of the challenge that we face.
OK, so, and what Paul Given would say is that he's not dreaming up that number just to make your life difficult. He says that if he doesn't get additional funding to the tune of about 800 million next year, he spelled out how he might have to make his budget work. And that involves withdrawing all home-to-school transport, cutting all funding for Sure Start and youth services. He's talked about having to make 6,500 teachers redundant, 3,000 non-teaching staff redundant to make the level of savings required. And even then, he says he's not sure he'd be able to balance his budget.
Well, we're involved in megaphone diplomacy as well, and megaphone negotiations. If I was in the Department of Education, I would start by cutting £83 a mile taxi runs. That would be where I would start from the first point, rather than looking at where I would cut teachers.
Well, you were the education minister. Were taxi runs £83 a mile when you were in charge?
I don't think so. No, I don't think they were.
Well, you don't think so, but you can't be sure.
Well, no.
Maybe Paul Given's not across that level of detail either.
Well, I'm out of the Department of Education for 10 years. But when I was in the Department of Education, there was not 1 year within the Department of Education that I ever spent my budget. But that does not underestimate the challenges that the Education Minister faces, the Economy Minister faces, the Infrastructure Minister faces, or even the Health Minister. But we cannot set a budget on the needs solely of one department. We have to set a budget on the needs of our society, our economy moving forward. And that budget has to be set within the envelope we have.
Okay.
The best
So you've made that point. Can I ask you this? When you say we are in a period of megaphone diplomacy at this point, are you saying that you don't believe Paul Given, the Education Minister, when he says that's the kind of pressure his budget is under?
I have no doubt the Education Minister's budget's under pressure. I'm not questioning it's under pressure.
Is it under that level of pressure?
The Minister will have to sit down with me and produce evidence around the scale of that. And he will be able to produce papers on that. But then we come to this reality. How do we fund those pressures? Because if we fund the pressures on the demand that is currently there, it is the entirety of the budget for the Department of the Economy. So as an executive, we have decisions to make. We're working within a constrained budgetary envelope as a result of austerity imposed on us by the British government.
Yeah, so you made that point.
We still have a job to do.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is I have put proposals before the executive, the public, the business community and others, and asked for a response and alternatives if they're there for those. Because we simply just can't walk away from the problem. There's a challenge, let's take it on.
Okay, can we talk about revenue raising? Because you always come around to this. People say, okay, well, you don't have the money to deliver what you say you need to deliver and want to deliver, but there is a lack of preparedness to look at the issue of revenue raising on the part of the executive. You've accepted the need for additional revenue raising. There are plans for increases in residential and non-residential rates. That has executive agreement. But where are we with plans, for example, to raise the domestic rate cap?
I have papers before the executive. In my view, the domestic budget cap should be raised. Between it and another proposal I have for the executive in terms of reducing the funding or the benefit you would get from paying your rates earlier, we could raise around £9 million.
Which is it's a big amount of money for people watching this programme. But in the overall budget for Northern Ireland, it is infinitesimally small.
But it still can make a difference. And that's one proposal from my department. If other departments...
And who's blocking that?
The DEP currently haven't agreed to that paper going on to the executive.
Okay, do you regard that as a blocking mechanism, a refusal to actually allow that to come before the executive?
To date, it hasn't been agreed to go onto the executive table. I am content to continue to engage with the DEP around that matter. I have set aside £10 million within the draft budget to support local businesses, small and medium enterprise businesses. I would much prefer to raise that money from the alternative route I proposed in terms of the rates changes I'm looking to make. But if we can't go down that route, I have set £10 million aside to support small and medium enterprises. But those are choices we have to make. We can use the £10 million out of the budget, or we can raise that £10 million in a different way. Okay,
you say that the DEP is preventing that from getting onto the agenda. The DEP, of course, says in response there are things it wants to do in terms of challenging benefit fraud that it would like to do, its Minister Gordon Lyons would like to do, that Sinn Féin won't allow onto the executive agenda.
Well, there's a number of elements to that, but the part of that I'm responsible for is this. The Communities Minister has presented my department with a business case in relation to benefit fraud and error, which I have in turn presented to the Treasury, who the Treasury are currently going through that document. They have come back to us with a number of questions. We have presented those questions to the Department for Communities. When those questions are clarified, I will bring them to the Treasury. But we should also be cautious in terms of what the Treasury are promising around this matter. The Treasury have committed to examining the business case and may award some of the savings, if there is savings to be had, back to the executive. There is no confirmation from the Treasury that they will award savings identified back to the executive.
Okay. Can I just pick up on a line that the DUP put out in response to your draft budget at the end of the week? I'll just quote it to you. The DUP will not accept a budget that fails to properly prioritise frontline services, particularly education, while wasteful and unnecessary spending continues elsewhere. What do you make of that?
Well, I won't accept waste in the system either. And it's
so do you believe the DUP is right when it says there is waste within the system?
There will always be efficiencies to be gained in the system, but it's the responsibility of individual ministers to identify where efficiencies can be identified within their departments. So I expect that to be the day-to-day job of a minister, to continuously engage with their permanent secretary and senior officials and see whether efficiencies can be found within their departments.
But you don't believe, presumably, do you, that efficiencies to the tune of £800 million could be found within education? I mean, that is a huge amount of money. No amount of tightening our belts and sorting out waste would deal with the sort of numbers, telephone numbers that we're talking about here.
The point I'm making here is that it's not the responsibility of someone else, in a sense, around the executive table. You can't look across the executive table and say, I expect you to deal with waste. I expect all ministers to deal with waste.
There was also mention in some of the criticism of the draft budget of pet projects. That came from the DUP. I wonder, do you think that was perhaps referring to the additional capital money that you're making available for Casement Park? Do you think that's what the DUP was referring to there?
It's a question best put to the DUP and to others. However, I believe the investment in Casement Park and other sporting stadia is the right thing to do. Sport brings positive changes into communities, not only for those who play it, for those who go to watch it, and for the organisation and community around that. So I'm not going to apologise for increasing investment in sport. I think investment in sport is a good thing.
OK. In a sentence, if we don't get agreement on a 3-year budget, how stuffed are we?
Well, I think there's a responsibility, and your viewers watching us today expect the executive to act in a responsible manner, and the responsible thing to do is to agree a 3-year budget. That will require engagement, negotiation and compromise by us all around the executive table. But let's keep our eye on the go, on the prize.
All right, we've got to leave it there. John O'Dowd, appreciate your time. We'll watch your comments in the Assembly tomorrow with interest and hear from you again before too long, no doubt. But thank you. Let's get some analysis of what the Minister had to say from Suzanne Breen, who's been listening. I mean, it's obvious just listening to John O'Dowd, the scale of the challenge that the Executive faces, and by definition we all face here as citizens of Northern Ireland.
Yes, it is, and it isn't of his making. No matter who was in that job, whether it was a DUP minister, whether it was an Ulster Unionist minister, whether it was an Alliance minister, they would face exactly the same problems. There is limited resources and there's a need for an awful lot of money for our public services. So he's in a bind.
You talked there about megaphone diplomacy in reference to some of the comments, in particular from the DUP, about education funding. But when you look at those numbers, a possible overspend of £800 million within the first year of this 3-year budget, those numbers are eye-watering. And then they roll year on year throughout the course of the 3-year period of this multi-year plan.
It's scary, Mark, and I think it's only going to get worse. I don't know what the ministers at Stormont are going to do, but you know, to have a multi-year budget published without executive agreement is a sign of huge dysfunctionality. We wouldn't have the same in Dublin or in London if they were facing the same pressures as we are. So it's just a sign that Stormont really isn't working.
And 2 weeks into a new year, this sets the tone for what's likely to be the conversation between now and the end of the year?
It does. Relations were already strained before this. They're only going to get worse. I don't know if there is a happy ending. I think that we will have agreement on a 1-year budget, but I think agreement on a multi-year budget is just too much for our executive.
OK. Suzanne, for now, thank you. We'll talk to you again a little bit later. Let's turn to that other big political story of the week, the Ulster Unionist leadership contest. So far, only John Burrows has entered the race to succeed Mike Nesbitt. So what does the North Antrim MLA believe he offers the party? Let's find out. He's with me in the studio. Welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining us, John Burrs. The last time the UUP had a contest for the leadership, it was between a shiny new MLA with a big media profile and the sitting deputy leader. Mike Nesbitt won that contest over John McAllister, but things didn't turn out to be as straightforward as Mr Nesbitt had perhaps imagined. Why do you think it would be different this time?
Well, good morning, Mark. I want to bring confidence to the Ulster Unionist Party, get us back on the front foot and be a party that's leading in unionism once again in Northern Ireland. I think in Northern Ireland we need renewal in our politics, both in the Ulster Unionist Party but also across the country, and that's what I want to deliver. Look, the past is a foreign country. Things happen differently then. We need to look to the future.
But you can learn from the past.
Absolutely. And no one wants to ignore what happened in the past. But look, we're the most democratic party in Northern Ireland. Every member will have a vote in this contest. I hope there is a contest so we can set out two competing visions and then unite behind that and deliver for the people of Northern Ireland, as the Ulster Unionist Party always have done. Yeah,
you presumably also want a contest because it would give you a level of democratic legitimacy, because you were co-opted into the seat. Your deputy co-runner is also someone who's been co-opted into her seat. So in a way, you need an electoral contest to be able to say you have an element of democratic legitimacy.
Well, that's outside of my control. There's two things at play here, Mark. The first is that we have a legitimate co-option system in Northern Ireland. People can have their view on it, but we have an unelected Deputy First Minister. We've had unelected ministers in our executive. I will never, even if I have my own mandate, criticise people who are co-opted. They show courage in going into Stormont. That's the system we have, and that should be respected. And second of all, any member can apply to be the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party. And it is for others to stand up, have a contest, and give all the members a vote on two visions for the future of our party.
OK, when Mike Nesbitt, well, he's just finishing his second term as leader, of course. When he won that position in a contest back in 2012, he'd been in MLA for twice as long as you've been one, and with his own mandate in Strangford. If you think about the fact I was elected leader within 11 months of being elected as an MLA, it was ridiculously early. That's what he had to say subsequently about taking on the job first time around. That's someone who's done the job and got the T-shirt not once but twice. Is it not worth taking that experience on board and wondering if you are as ready for this challenge as you clearly believe you are?
Look, politics needs a renewal, and I think there's a very powerful symbol from Diane Armstrong and myself, who's an outstanding politician, by the way, to say that the Ulster Unionist Party is looking for talent. The Ulster Unionist Party is prepared to see a bright new future. We're looking for talent, and we're prepared to put...
Is there no talent there already?
No, we're actually a talented party, which is why I was attracted to the Ulster Unionist Party. It's the only party I was interested in joining because of the values in that team, the hard work in that team. But what a statement it is that you can join the Ulster Unionist Party, be in that MLA team, and be in a position to go for leadership and deputy leadership.
Yeah. And what does it say about the party that a former leader who went through that experience with twice the experience as an MLA that you have says it was ridiculously early for him to take on that challenge? When I asked Mike Nesbitt about you perhaps succeeding him as leader on this programme last October, he said, let me quote, "What John needs to do is win the seat in North Antrim in his own right."
OK, North Antrim will always be my priority. And I'll tell you why. Because the people of Northern Ireland who have representatives, those representatives should be focused on delivering for them. That's why I've been very critical of people talking about Gaza in the chamber when the grit boxes, when there's an adverse weather incident, are not filled with salt. That's one of the problems in our politics in Northern Ireland. Politicians who are distracted and self-indulgent.
Well, they were talking about our education minister going to Israel. That's how that conversation came about.
Well, you're talking about that conversation. I took part in that particular debate. Actually, it dominates what happens in councils and on Stormont all of the time. Council chamber after council chamber, they're debating international affairs. They're debating symbolism whilst they're not actually doing their jobs. People in Northern Ireland want to change. Our politicians need to get on with doing the core job for the people of Northern Ireland. And let's just deal with this leadership issue. Look,
can I just quote another line from Mike Nesbitt, and then we'll move on. He went on to say in that interview last October, when he was discussing the possibility of you being co-opted into the seat, so before it happened, he said, "We both agreed immediately that if he did take the seat, his focus had to be on being on the ground and winning the seat in May 2027 in his own right." So just for clarity, you're now going back on that agreement?
Not going back on any agreement. Let me be crystal clear. My priority is always, as every MLA should be, and every MP should be, and everyone else should be on delivering for their constituency. I have a very good constituency operation. We deliver for the people of North Antrim all the time. I've already went out very clearly and said I would not be giving myself a ministerial position ever as a party leader, because my job is to focus on leading the party full-time and delivering for the people of North Antrim, who it is a privilege of a lifetime to lead for. And I just want to deal with leadership experience. I have decades of leadership experience. I have decades of public service experience. I have decades of trying to work and solve problems, build relationships, sometimes with people who have difficult moral positions with, so I always had a very...
But you're untried and untested in the political arena, that's the point.
I'm just going to answer this, because this is, and I described it as a parochial view, not amongst the public, but actually amongst the political and some of the media classes. People in private industry move from being the chief executive of an organisation and a conglomerate.
I think we know that.
That's responsible, let me answer the question, for getting airlines around the world, and then they move into an organisation that's responsible for supermarkets, because they bring the transferable skills. People need to have a look at Stormont and say, actually, do we need fresh talent? Are things working as they should? Because when I've went in there, I've seen a lot of waste, a lot of distraction, and a lot of things that could be done better. And what we need to do is build from the political experiences there, fresh talent, and actually renew politics for the people of Northern Ireland. OK,
you told the Stormont Sources podcast earlier in the week that you have red lines on the issue of the health minister and health policy. What exactly, I just wonder, does that mean? Does that mean that the health minister, whoever that might be, in future, whether you would retain Mike Nesbitt or not, would have the freedom to make decisions, or would you be pulling the strings behind the scenes?
Well, those in the executive should deliver as a collegiate body. We've just seen from your interview with John O'Dowd how that doesn't work. But those in the executive have to be able to deliver. I was very clear with Stormont Sources, and let me say this. I've been interviewed for decades in my previous role by journalists. I'm not going to answer questions about appointments that I would make if I was the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party.
Yeah, I didn't ask you who you would appoint.
I'm going to address the question, because that was the context in which I was asked the question by Stormont Sources journalists. Here's the reality, OK? Anyone who is sitting down to appoint a team will sit down with their team members. I said if there were red lines, for example, that were difficult, you'd have to sit down, talk with the current incumbent. That is just good, normal politics. I'm not going to discuss with anybody, other than the people themselves, who would be appointed to what.
Yeah,
that is not serious.
My question is, who would be running the department? Would it be the individual you appointed as minister, or would it be you telling that individual what you wanted him or her to do?
Of course it would be the health minister. One of the problems we've got is we have a dysfunctional executive that isn't making collegiate decisions. They need to actually and that's why we need long-term reform. One of the things I've come out very early and said is Stormont actually does need to reform, not losing the cross-community and cross-community protections, but reforming its efficiency and its way it delivers to the people of Northern Ireland.
OK, the MLAs who are part of your team up at Stormont, those who have a mandate, were elected on the manifesto at the last Assembly election. I wonder, just very quickly, if you would, very briefly, tell me, what direction would you want to take the policy of the Ulster Unionist Party that would differ from where it is at the moment and the mandate that those MLAs currently have?
Well, first of all, what attracted me to the Ulster Unionist Party was the quality of those MLAs. That's why I was interested in joining. I think they're first-rate public servants who do a good job for the people of Northern Ireland. Now, what do we need to do going forward? Well, let me just put my position very clearly, because a lot of talk in the media about left, right, traditional, progressive. People of Northern Ireland, and I'm very tired of those labels, and I think the people of Northern Ireland are as well. I will be a strong unionist. I will advocate for our position in the union. I will challenge strongly the rewriting of history, perhaps more than anyone else when it comes to Sinn Féin. But you see, when it comes to policy, and you're asking about policy, what we need to do in Northern Ireland is ditch the labels and have policy that is anchored in common sense, anchored in evidence, and anchored in fact.
Well, 10 months ago, you were the guest speaker at the TUV annual conference. That's before you had any political alignment. Were you tempted to join that party?
No, I wasn't. And let's just nail that. I said at the TUV conference that if Sinn Féin invited me to Ardèche to speak on policing as a guest speaker, I would go. Had I went to that, I'm sure you wouldn't be now asking me, were you tempted to join Sinn Féin?
Well, if you were elected leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, would you still take up an invitation to speak at a Sinn Féin Ardèche?
Well, I'll decide that at the time.
But I'm asking you now.
Well, I would speak anywhere, but people mightn't like...
That'd be yes then, wouldn't it?
People mightn't like the message they give, but I believe in evangelising for the union, and I believe in selling Northern Ireland, and I will do across the world. We need to reinforce the successes in Northern Ireland. Look, unemployment's down 90%.
Right.
We've got a great private sector, but the politics has failed the people of Northern Ireland. And I want to just stress what you asked with the
Well,
TUV.
just very quick, we're nearly out of time.
I've actually said I think the TUV's approach to collapsing Stormont is a disaster for the union.
And you've said that you would never collapse Stormont.
And it would play straight into the hands of Republicans and as a dereliction of duty.
All right.
So I'm not anywhere near the TUV's position on many things.
Okay, all right. Look, we're out of time. Appreciate you coming in to join us. And if you're successful, we look forward to having a proper in-depth interview with you at that point. Let's just get a word with Suzanne, who's been listening to that. How important is it, from John Burrow's perspective, that there is a contest for the leadership this time around? There hasn't been one since 2012.
I think John very much wants a contest. I think senior figures in the party feel the same way. Robbie Butler's camp at the moment have been ringing round local associations, engaging support for him, but they're asking for that support in theory. They are not saying that Robbie Butler is definitely running. Now, when this vacancy arose at the top of the UUP, I think John was the clear favourite to secure the job. And with the addition of Diana Armstrong on the ticket as his deputy leader, then I think John's position has strengthened. Diana being the only female MLA, and also bringing all those Fermanagh delegates who will be voting in any contest. I think in order to counter that, Robbie would need a big name on his ticket. He would need potentially someone like Robin Swan to run as his deputy, and I think that that isn't going to happen. So Robbie faces a dilemma. If he doesn't run, he has been a UUP MLA for a decade. He's standing by while two newcomers, the two newest UUP MLAs in Stormont, run for the leadership. He will face claims that he's a bottler, that he lacks guts. There'll be a hard 24 hours in the media. So what's your hunch?
Do you think he'll run or not?
My hunch is that he probably won't run, that not running is the wise strategic thing to do, that he can sell it. He can say he has gone out there, he has consulted with grassroots members, and the feeling at the moment is for John. He respects that, and in the interests of party unity, he isn't going to stand, and he's going to support John when he becomes leader, and that puts Robbie in a much stronger position internally if John runs into trouble in his leadership. I'm not saying John will run into trouble, but if he does, Robbie is there. He hasn't been heavily defeated. He's in a stronger position to challenge.
John Burrs, just very quickly, that's not a great scenario from your point of view. How do you respond to what Suzanne's just said if it turns out to be right and we don't have a lot of time?
Look, I can't control that. I'm setting out very clearly what I'm going to offer the Ulster Unionist Party as we have confidence to go on and lead Unionism again. It's for any other candidate to decide if they want to run. And I want to make one point very clear. I've said it publicly. There'll be nothing negative coming from my campaign about my colleagues. And anyone who publishes or says that my camp have briefed against Robbie Butler or anywhere else.
But you'd like him to run, is the bottom line.
I will challenge them because they're valued colleagues who I want to work with, and I will support whoever wins. Because there's a job to be done for the people of Northern Ireland.
We've got to leave it there, folks. Thanks very much indeed. Suzanne, thank you. John Burrows, thank you. For more on the Ulster Unionist leadership, you can look out for this week's Red Lines podcast. It's available now on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcast. That's it for today. I'm back with The View on Thursday at the usual time on BBC One. For now, from all of us, bye-bye.